you are an economic scholar, and you've pointed out that much of white grievance, and those are my words, is a result of the middle class being left out after Reagan. Do you see President Biden's economic policies as a source of healing this polarization? Hopefully, wealth gets more widely shared.
So this is a really important point, because what happened in 1980, of course, was that Ronald Reagan is elected by 50.1% of the vote. And he argued that if you got rid of government regulation and taxation, what it would do is it would concentrate wealth at the top of the economic scale, and those people would in turn invest in new industries quite efficiently because they were working with the markets, and those industries would grow and hire more people, and all boats would rise together. Many of you may remember that, the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Is that right? A rising tide lifts all boats. But in fact, what happened was wealth concentrated to the top. If you look at any graph about any kind of economic scale from 1981, you can see money moving to the top. And what that did is it hollowed out the middle class. So taxes, in fact, never really went down. What happened was that who paid the taxes changed. And the economic growth that system was supposed to goose, if you will, never materialized. So what Biden has done, and what that did is it created this very disaffected group of people who are, felt that they, you had to work 2 jobs, you no longer had cultural capital, you no longer necessarily had religious capital, and you certainly didn't have actually in the bank capital. And authoritarians will tell you, or the people who study authoritarianism will tell you, that that population is ripe for a strong man to come in and say, I can take you back to when you used to be important. And I can do it not by actually fixing anything, but by putting in place a series of universal religious laws or traditional laws that will take us back to that magic place. Now, I will emphasize when I say that when Donald Trump spoke in 2015 and 16, when he was running for the presidency, he was the most moderate economic candidate on the Republican stage. People forget that because they focus on the racism and the sexism. But he called for cheaper and better health care. He called for infrastructure. That's why the infrastructure thing kept coming up again and again. He said there was going to be infrastructure. He called for bringing back manufacturing. He called for closing loopholes so that rich people paid more taxes. We've all forgotten that, but he was referring to those economic grievances of that specific group. So one of the things that Biden has done is he has stopped that 40-year period in which we focused on markets as being the solution to constructing society, and has in fact gone back to the early period under which we lived from 1933 to 1981, in which Americans as a group, no matter what party you belonged to, agreed that the government had a role to play in regulating business, providing a basic social safety net, promoting infrastructure, and protecting civil rights. And he's been really articulate about this. This is not a mystery. One of the things that he has done, though, that's different than, for example, FDR or Teddy Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, who tried to do very similar things, is that rather than centering heteronormative nuclear families, trying to make sure men had the ability to support their wives and children, which is quite literally what FDR talks about, Biden tried to center children, which is a whole new kettle of fish. Because if you center children, who their parents are matters a lot less. And he's not been able to do that, but he articulated that early on. But he has very much tried to do that, and he's tried to do it in what they keep calling a whole of government way, which has gotten almost no attention in the press, although they're not shy about it. Believe me, the Biden administration tells you what's going on a pretty constant basis. But what that means is that they have asked every possible agency or department that is involved in something to get involved in it. So, for example, on the 26th of September, I think it was, now it's going to bother me, because it was the anniversary of the construction, the establishment of the Federal Trade Commission. They launched a lawsuit against Amazon. which was a really big deal. And the reason they did that is they are trying to get rid of a system that was put in place during the 1980s by Robert Bork, who said that it was okay if companies all combined, so long as it meant that that consumers got lower prices in the short term. So you didn't need to have competition any longer. You didn't have to have people who could strike for higher wages. You didn't have to have any of the ability for entrepreneurs, for example, to break into a market, which one can't do against Amazon when it controls 40% of the market. All of that was fine so long as in the short term consumers got lower prices. Well, the Biden administration has worked very hard to go back before that to the traditional meaning of antitrust from the early 20th century that says it is a value to our community to have workers be able to have higher wages. It is a value to our community to be able to have competition because it creates innovation and it creates lower prices, and it means that there's an openings for new businesses to start. It's a value to the community to have a much more vibrant economy rather than simply focusing on short-term lower prices. So they've done that. I just outlined the antitrust stuff, but they've done that for wages. They've done that. One of the things when we talk about the increasing wages and how wages have increased a lot faster than they have over inflation, where that's especially true is in people who made less than $20,000 a year. So what that means is that in a brief period of time, many of those laws have now ended because the pandemic, the extreme ways that people were trying to fix the pandemic, many of those have expired now. But in 2 years, they wiped out 25% of the inequality that had built up over the past 40 years. Now that's rising again, but he worked very hard to do that. And he worked to do that, I think, because he cares about the economic side of it. But I will point out, which he's never talked about, but as a historian I will, when we have what is known as compression between between income and wealth, which are two separate things. So the people at the bottom don't have that much of a gap between them and people at the top. So for example, in the 1950s, the difference between a Ford worker and the Ford CEO was about 8 times. The guy at the top made about 8 times what the person at the bottom does. Now it's more than 350 times. And when we have those periods of compression, people tend to be much more willing to open up society to people from different races, different ethnicities, different genders, because there is this sense that if you can feed your own kids, you're perfectly happy to let somebody else feed their own kids. But if you can't feed your own children, you start to blame that guy next to you. And so I think Biden has really worked to do that. It's not getting a lot of attention, which is sort of astonishing. This administration has been one of the most transformational presidencies in history, and I will say I did not expect that. I did not expect that. I won't say any more than that. But the fact that this transformational a president has gotten so little attention for that is really sort of mind-boggling.